This conference will now be recorded.
And paring away things, editing things out, moving things to the preamble, and so on. And so there's still more of that. There is at least one addition that's going to go in, though. You'll see in the new version, where is it? Towards the end of the much shorter preambulatory language now, there's a bracketed portion that says a revised legal analysis section will appear here, and it describes the three subjects. This is something we've been working on and just didn't have time to complete before this meeting. It's going to be very short. In fact, it seems to keep getting shorter by design. We really don't want to say too much on the substance. And also, with some things, it's a little tricky. Some judicial doctrines, the Portland Cement Rule, and so on, obviously they are relevant to the processes that we're discussing, and it would be a mistake not to allude to them. On the other hand, judicial doctrines, they vary from circuit to circuit, and when people call them into question, for example, then Judge Kavanaugh has complaints about Portland Cement. We're just taking extra care to be able to refer to the doctrines because they are law, while at the same time not implying any kind of substantive views on either way on the doctrines. So we're going to formulate that and circulate it by email, and hopefully be able to resolve that with an online vote via email without having to reconvene the committee. But I just wanted to flag that. Does anybody have any questions about that or concerns about that before we jump into the recommendations and then the preamble? No? Okay. Well, go ahead, Tom.
Sorry. With that teaser, should I call roll?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, please. Todd, you're muted.
All right, Jennifer Jones or Jenny Jones is serving as an alternate for James Anderson.
Yes.
Thank you. Emily Bremer.
Here.
Dan Cohen, government member, Department of Energy.
Here.
Alana Cohen, public member.
Here.
Peter Constantine, government member, Department of Labor.
Here, thank you.
And Radha Vishnu Rajala, who will be serving as Peter's alternate for the last hour of the meeting.
Here.
Neil Eisner, senior fellow.
Here.
Andrew Emery, special counsel.
Here.
Emily Hammond, public member.
Here.
Levon Schlichter, alternate for Hillary Mallower, government member, Department of Education.
Here.
Randolph May, senior fellow. Mitchell Plave, alternate for Bao Nguyen, government member, Office of the Controller of the Currency.
Here.
Rebecca Orban, liaison representative, U.S. Coast Guard.
Here, I have audio only.
Okay. Spencer Phillips, who will be serving as Rebecca's alternate for the latter half. Dick Pierce, senior fellow.
Here.
David Pritzker, special counsel. Bertrell Ross, public member.
Here.
Anna Shavers, public member.
Here.
Andrew Simons, alternate for Carol Ann Siciliano, government member, EPA. Lon Smith, senior fellow.
Here.
Kevin Stack, public member.
Here.
Robert Stone, government member, OSHA.
Here.
Tom Sussman, liaison representative, ABA, Administrative Law and Regulatory Practice Section.
Here.
Chris Kirkpatrick, alternate for Dr. Heath Tarbert, government member, CFTC.
Here.
Miriam Vincent, government member, NARA. Christopher Yu, project consultant.
Here.
Margie O'Haron, DOJ.
Here.
Noel Green, EPA. Susan Minson, OMB.
Present.
Scott Albright, EPA.
Here.
Michelle Walker, Department of Labor.
Here.
Jamie Wong, Department of Justice. Steph Tatham, Government Member, OMB. Anyone whose name I have not called.
Yeah, hi Todd. This is Tim Mullins with Department of Transportation. I guess I'm the alternate member for today for Jonathan Doles.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Miriam
Okay.
Vincent messaged me. She's having some technology issues, but she is also here. Government Member Nara. All right, Adam,
Okay.
I think we can go ahead.
Great. Thanks, Todd. Thanks, everybody. First, let's click through the recommendations one by one just to make sure we have final approval on those, and then we will turn to the preamble and work our way through that. Let's start with recommendation 1. Oh, and by the way, I want to say there were a number of substantive comments that were submitted at the last meeting. Andrew Simons, Margie O'Haron, Dick Pierce, and I'm sorry if I'm forgetting anybody, but thank you everybody for these, and we've worked them into the recommendation. Okay, so we'll start with recommendation number 1. As you'll see, it eliminates the what used to be sort of the subset of more specific details. 1, agencies should decide the classes of rulemaking materials. Agencies should decide which classes of rulemaking materials should be withheld to protect personal or confidential commercial information, which we define as protected material, notwithstanding any countervailing public benefits of disclosure. Does anybody have any further comments or concerns about that? If not, how does this work, Todd? Do we just do a show of hands to get a final approval, or do I just go through to the second one and then we approve them all en masse at the end?
I guess it's maybe Reeve can chime in here if I'm incorrect. I think we probably just go through the recommendations one by one. If someone objects or has some suggestions, and they go in, but I don't think we take a vote on each individual paragraph.
Yeah, I agree with Todd. That's, I mean, it's up to you, Adam, but ultimately, yeah, I think that's probably the most efficient way of doing it here.
Well, then I'll move much more quickly through them then, and needless to say, I'm not going to read them all verbatim. That one just happened to be nice and short.
This is Andrew Simons. I have a process
Sure, go ahead.
question. One comment we had, which is probably more in the preamble, but it sort of flows over into the recommendations, was the use of personal, quote unquote, personal information is sort of arguably vague, and we were wondering whether something like personally identifiable information or personal privacy information, something that better tracks sort of the Privacy Act or FOIA would be better. So I don't know that it's directly implicated here. It's sort of throughout. So as a point of process, I'm just not sure whether to raise it here or wait for the preamble or.
Well, so this is an ongoing discussion
Right.
we've been having throughout, is how to take this whole myriad statutes, other standards, and boil them down into something that we can refer to speedily throughout. We've defined them at a very high level of generality here as personal information. Needless to say, we're not proposing any expansion beyond what's already previously protected. And the placeholder of this, what we're going to add in about legal, sort of the legal analysis, drawing in the Privacy Act and Trade Secrets Act, that will help to clarify what we are talking about here. But what are you proposing? A different specific term?
Well, I guess I wanted to open up and see what people thought about using something more specific, like personally identifiable information, which is like PII, which is what I'm used to. There might be folks with a little bit more expertise in this area that might have other suggestions as well, or
Well, okay, let's anybody else have any thoughts on this? Christopher, go ahead.
I think the point's very well taken. The one thing I have an alternative suggestion, because PII actually is a term of art among privacy people and invokes the type of information, not the legal status of particular information. I would intentionally avoid language that maps perfectly onto exactly any one statute, because we don't want to suggest that it follows any one statute. One way to do that might be to use the word protected personal information, to pick up protection to refer to any legal protection it might receive. But I think that that's a decision for the whole committee to figure out how to balance that. The only thing is, if PII is a term of art, and if we refer to a word for word from the Privacy Act, which really talks about records and has a very specific definition inside, and different statutes, the E-Government Act, use slightly different language, we don't want to suggest we're referring only to one statute. And so finding a more descriptive term that, the reason I'm suggesting the word protected is to suggest that you look at some other statute or some other basis of law to figure out what's inside or outside. Personally identifiable information refers to this type of information, regardless of whether it's protected by law or not. So that's one suggestion I might have, but obviously this is something to bat around for the whole committee.
Andrew, how about that? Protected.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's also very. I'm thinking an excellent point, and this seems to make sense to me. It would sort of accomplish that goal, I think.
Okay. Any objections to anybody to inserting protected into personal information? Protected personal information will be the general catch-all term. Jenny?
We have to.
Sorry,
Adam,
Jenny
Todd.
Jones.
Okay,
Yeah,
go ahead.
Does anybody have a problem with protected? It just.
Yeah, that's what I was going to raise.
Yeah.
It creates linguistic challenges, but yeah. That's
I mean, it is, admittedly, it is a little circular, but what we're trying to do here is lend a little bit of specificity to this term without mapping it onto a specific statute.
I defer to the group. Yeah.
Emily, go ahead.
Are there any examples, and this might be a question for the consultant, but are there instances where agencies extend protection to information that wouldn't fall under what I understand to be a sort of term of art of personally protected information? Because I don't think we want to cast it too narrowly if we intend for these recommendations to apply to other examples where agencies, for reasons of their own, are offering protection to information that someone might consider personal that is nonetheless not PPI in the technical sense.
Christopher, do you have any thoughts on that?
So the general background norm in the rulemaking context is towards disclosure, and FOIA makes that pretty clear. And so there is, the exceptions are to FOIA, which influence the interpretation of the Privacy Act and the Trade Secret Acts, are discretionary under the strictly FOIA context. But the general read of the cases is that the thumb of the scale should be on the side of disclosure, which limits agencies to discretion to withhold information in the absence of a clear legal mandate to withhold. As a matter of a suggestion of avoiding protected personal information, I have a purely wordsmithing suggestion that can avoid the awkwardness.
Sure, go ahead, Chris.
Agencies should decide whether or when, I'm not sure, let's say whether to withhold protected personal information from rulemaking materials or rulemaking dockets. I don't know the exact word for the last, but it's from rulemaking dockets. I'm sorry, personal information or confidential commercial information from rulemaking dockets.
So this is in recommendation number 1 is where you would put it?
Whether to withhold, and then I would say delete from the word right where the addition there, protected, through the end of the second line on line 61. Whether to withhold protected personal information, leave, or confidential commercial information. No, Todd, leave that. Withhold, delete back to withhold. Move down to line 62 after the parentheses, before the comma, after protected material. From rulemaking, and insert the language from rulemaking, and assuming that there's a difference in materials and dockets, I would say materials to pair up what's above. And that just avoids the awkwardness of protected without attempting to change the meaning. Well, attempting not to change the meaning in that sense.
Okay, hold on a second. Agencies should decide whether to withhold protected personal information or confidential commercial information here and after protected material from rulemaking. I don't think we mean rulemaking materials. We mean rulemaking dockets, right? From the public rulemaking docket.
I agree.
Notwithstanding any countervailing public benefits of disclosure. Now this cleans up recommendation 1 a bit. It still leaves, we still have this question though of what we're going to refer to this. If we're going to refer to it as, I guess we're going to refer to it as protected personal information to answer Andrew's original question or concern. Okay, before you offered that, I thought 2 hands go up, Peter Constantine's and maybe, no, Bertrand Ross, did you have your hand up at one point? I thought I saw you raise your hand.
I had it up, but this discussion is going to take care of my concern.
But I think that
okay.
Christopher's amendment addressed my concern.
Okay. Does anybody else have comments on this? Okay. Why don't we take a vote on this? I do want to take a vote on this revised language then. Okay, all in favor of the language as it currently appears with Todd's edits, please raise your hand. Okay.
Is there a way to virtually raise your hand?
To what, raise your hand?
Virtually, like is there an icon or that I'm missing?
Oh, I'm sorry. Do you have a camera?
I'm looking for it.
I couldn't see who said that. If you're a voting member, please turn on your camera to raise your hand. I see Christopher Kirkpatrick has signaled in the chat he is virtually raising his hand. Okay.
Right. So this is Dan Cohen. Can I just say I don't have a camera, but I want to raise my hand. So where's the chat feature on here?
Yeah, if you don't have a camera, please signal it in the chat function. But if you do have a camera, please turn it on and raise your hand. Let's try this one more time. In favor of the current language, please raise your hand. And we have Christopher Kirkpatrick in the chat function. All right. Anybody opposed to this language? Okay. All right. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Todd, and thanks, Christopher, for clearing that one up. Let's move on to number 2. Again, number 2, relative to the last meeting. Oh, and Daniel Cohen's signaled he voted yes in the chat. On number 2, again, we've eliminated significant language, the former subsections B and C, and just tightened it up by saying except where disclosure is limited by law in subsection A. Any discussion on this recommendation? Just Todd in the chat, Mitchell Plave and Andrew Simons have just indicated that we're at a webcam limit. Reeve, Todd, Matt, is that something you guys have run into before?
I don't know what a webcam limit is. I know Jennifer and Nathan are handling the tech issues that arise here. So this is not something I've heard of before.
Such a popular rulemaking. We have so many people in the room. We're overloading the technology. Okay, well, let's just keep proceeding with this. And if we have to take another vote, we'll find a way to manage this without webcams.
Adam, it's Matt.
Go ahead, Matt.
Those who are experiencing a webcam overload, does that mean that their voices cannot be heard?
I think their voices can be heard because we heard from Andrew earlier, and he's one of the people experiencing this.
Subject to any input Reeve has here, it seems to me that if you're going to take votes on individual recommendations, rather than just getting sort of an informal consensus, that the better way to do it may be just simply to ask if anybody has it, especially if there appears to be consensus, just to ask if there's any objection rather than trying to get a show of hands. I think that's more efficient. Everyone will have an opportunity at the end to vote up or down on the recommendation in any event. Reeve?
Yes, I agree. I think that's probably the most efficient way of working through this. And I'm checking whether tech people on the webcam limit issue, but yeah, I think for purposes of votes, that's the most efficient way to proceed. Just ask for any objections.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to take a vote on the first one, given that it sort of goes to the heart of a lot of what's going on with how we're defining these terms. But we'll, for the rest, just see if there are objections. Starting with recommendation number 2, does anybody have any comments on this before I ask about objections? Any object? Okay, so we'll proceed. Any objections to recommendation 2 as it's currently drafted? Okay. Seeing none, we'll move on to recommendation number 3. Again, reduced out some of the content from last time, inserted an allowance for agencies to link to the proper notifications that are discussed in paragraph 2. Any discussion on the revised recommendation 3? Okay. Any objections to recommendation 3 as it's currently written? Okay. And by the way, with the tech issues, separate from voting, I don't want to, if anybody is having camera problems and they would like to weigh in, and I'm not, obviously I won't see you raising your hand since your camera isn't working. And if I don't catch you in the chat function, don't let me bulldoze past you. Just turn on your microphone and interrupt me so that I don't breeze past you on this. Okay, recommendation number 4, reference to the role of GSA in this process through regulations.gov and so on. Does anybody have any comments on this one? I see Steph Tatham's hand up.
Hi, everybody. This is Steph Tatham with OMB. I'm joined on the phone by my colleague, Susan Minson, who I don't think has had time to fully review this recommendation or discuss it with GSA, but I just wanted to share a couple of thoughts with you. So this looks like it's directed at the Program Management Office for e-rulemaking within GSA. So it's not directed at OMB, but I just wanted to get some clarification on what it is that you're trying to recommend here, and then give a little perspective on sort of how the system works right now. So I was wondering if the intent is to give agencies an opportunity to share their own policies on regulations.gov, or if there was an intent to have GSA collecting all of the information and then sharing it on the agency's behalf. And just so you have a little bit more information on how regulations.gov works, typically the way that it works is that the Program Management Office doesn't offer customized general tools for agencies. So any automated emails would be the same for any commenter across the government. And similarly, if you go to regulations.gov and you look at the comment submission form, that is a standard form that is used for each of the agencies across the government. So there really isn't, the way the system is built right now, a lot of room for customization. But what agencies are able to do is post in their dockets information that is specific to their agency. So actually, when they do post a notice of proposed rulemaking or a request for a comment, if that included, per the recommendation above, the agency's policy about the disclosure of related information, that would also automatically be propagated into regulations.gov by virtue of having appeared in the notice. So beyond that, I'm trying to figure out what it is that you're looking for, and then it would be helpful if we could check with GSA to determine if that is a change from sort of a standard non-customized form approach that is typically taken for each of the agencies across the government that would require a level of specificity, and whether that would be feasible.
Thanks,
What the
Steph.
day goes like.
Sorry? Oh, Steph, just in response to your initial question about the sort of the purpose of this, it's really intended to be at a very high level of generality, a recognition of the fact that agencies are not sort of the sole operational entities in the rulemaking process in terms of conveying information out to the public, including commenters. In wanting to, as the recommendation sort of lays out, create this iterative process where submitters and others are given notice both upfront and throughout the process, even after they submit comments, that there may be an opportunity to remove information that's been submitted into the docket. We wanted to at least recognize that GSA may have a role to play in that. I don't think we're trying to micromanage any specific duties on behalf, or sorry, micromanage any specific duties for GSA. That's why all we specify here is should work with those agencies that participate in regulations.gov to include the notifications described in paragraph 2 within any automated emails. We don't specify the content. Paragraph 2 doesn't specify the content of those disclosures. Now, needless to say, we don't want to make recommendations on something that is impossible or for GSA to do, or suggest a radical change in what GSA is doing. This really is just, I think, intended as an acknowledgement that GSA plays a role in this, and that ideally would be able to help facilitate the work of the agencies. Have I overstated this or misstated this? Anybody on the ACUS team or Christopher? No. So, Steph, I don't think I've necessarily answered your question, because I've said we have a recommendation here that recommends a little more than please get along and be helpful.
Yeah,
what do you
yeah,
think?
and I absolutely think that it makes sense that when folks go to regulations.gov, they should be able to get this sort of information. I think it's maybe the part of this that discusses automated emails that is maybe a little bit overly prescriptive. And then in terms of the relevant parts of regulations.gov, I think we could figure that out, but it wasn't immediately intuitive to me what that was. And I just wanted to make sure that we weren't asking GSA to do a customization for every agency. And if we were asking them to do that, you know, we'd obviously want to ask them to do that via hyperlink to the agency's policy, so that they weren't responsible for automatically updating. So I think that my specific recommendation would be to strike the automated emails that regulations.gov sends acknowledging receipt of a comment, unless or until GSA confirms that that's something that's like technically easy or for them to do. It seems to me that it might be quite difficult. I guess we'd have to strike the within any as well, sorry. And then strike the and at the end of that on relevant parts of regulations.gov. And I think that might be more achievable. Susan, is there anything that you'd like to add? Susan's our e-rulemaking.
I'm looking at the document you sent me on Friday, and I'm trying to understand that in the context. So I'll have more to say later, I think.
Okay.
Now, by way of background, if I remember correctly, and Christopher, Todd, Reeve, remind me if I'm wrong, in one of the earlier meetings, we had a discussion about emails in particular, because the point of the recommendation was, again, to have an iterative process where people are reminded of this, the possibility of protection, both at the front end of the process when they're submitting comments, and then even sort of a last off ramp after they've submitted their comments. That's where the reference to email came from, if I remember correctly. And so this is something that was previously discussed. And so I don't want to, your point is well taken. I'd like to open this up to discussion, because I want to make sure that we we like, again, don't sort of ask too much of GSA, but at the same time, I want us to be mindful of where this recommendation came from in the first place. Anybody else have, Christopher, go ahead.
Would it address the concerns if we kept the language proposed for deletion and added the word like if to the extent feasible or if feasible? Because that way it preserves the intention of including that as a good idea, but acknowledging that it might be practically impossible and not requiring anyone to do so, to do so if it's not feasible.
And by the way, I would add, if the concern is emails per se, we could always make it more general and say, within any communications that are sent acknowledging receipt of a comment. I mean, we can get away from emails per se, I think. But again, if the concern is any responsive communications, more generally, I mean, the committee can eliminate that, but we did include it for a particular reason. Levon?
Yeah, hi. I'm almost positive that there are automated emails when you submit a comment on regulations.gov that are sent out already with a tracking number to the submitter. I think perhaps maybe the fix here is to just have that the recommendations say that the emails should notify the commenter that the agency may have policies on these issues and to contact the person listed for the particular rulemaking with any questions about those policies.
Yeah, this is stuff, I think that would be better, because the concern that I have is that it's not clear to me that the automated email is customizable by agency. And so something, there is some general language about the privacy policy, there is some general government-wide language, but if GSA had to customize that for each agency to include a link to each agency's policy, that would be a heavier lift. I think this latter comment does address the concern.
So, Levon, could you repeat one more time what the suggestion would be?
Sure. The suggestion would be that as part of the email that is, I believe, already generated when you submit a comment, that it mentions that some agencies or the agency may have policies about withholding protected personal information and confidential commercial information, whatever the language is that we've been using, and to contact the person listed in as the agency contact in the rulemaking with any on those policies.
Christopher, what do you think of that?
Maybe
you're muted, Christopher.
It would the only disadvantage is it would potentially create calls to rulemaking staff within the agencies. And if there was a more automated way to disclose the information without a direct contact to the rulemaking staff, that would be better, I guess. It also the details of what this is exactly going to be is less important than making sure we get GSA and the agencies involved to do something smart, and to take into account. And to some extent, drilling down more in the exact details of how to do it is, to me, less important than providing a suggestion that there be an intelligent consideration of how it should be handled. So, on the specific recommendation, I'd avoid creating burdens on agency staff as much as possible. The whole goal is to automate this information as much as possible. And the second is just to avoid getting too far into this and more just having everyone work together, not imposing any unreasonable demands, but taking advantage of the technology as much as it allows us.
I mean, Steph, what would it be responsive to your concerns and leave on your comment if instead of adding a lot more substance, we actually just softened the recommendation slightly along the lines of the GSA's e-rulemaking program management office should, I don't want to say investigate, but should consider the feasibility of working with those agencies, right? We're just asking, on the one hand, we don't want to tell GSA just something that they can't do. On the other hand, what we do want to do here is nudge the agencies and GSA together to providing the public with one last notification of these, the Privacy Act especially, but these statutory protection regimes. I don't know. This is a problem that ACUS runs into over and over again in terms of the feasibility of agency action. So I don't know if Reeve, do you have any thoughts on how far we should push on this?
No, other than to say, yeah. I mean, I think it's a very legitimate concern, and I think that, that what you've done here, I mean, I'm looking at the language now. I think pretty effectively addresses that. I don't think there's really too much of a precedent, but you know, I think it's certainly a valid concern, and I think this hopefully captures it. Though I'd be interested in additional thoughts.
All right. So what we have right now is sort of a hash of three different recommendations, including my own. So let me try to bring this to a head. Let's just start with this last one I've offered. Steph, is it just a question of saying, I mean, would it be too much to ask GSA of just recommending that they consider the feasibility of working with agencies to include this kind of disclosure?
I think that's fine. I'm still a little unclear on which disclosure. So right now there are sort of two on the table. One is a very general disclosure that agencies may have policies on protected personal information. I think that's very achievable.
Just to be clear, I'm talking about the original recommendation as it was drafted for the meeting, the one that you raised concerns about in the first place, where we about including in these automated emails. What I'm saying is, what if we just amend that recommendation to say the GSA should consider the feasibility of working with agencies to provide that disclosure in the emails?
I think it would be okay. My preference would be, you know, a stronger recommendation to try and figure out something that is maybe less specific, but that shares the goal of notifying the public of agencies' policies. And, you know, at the point where they submit their comment or after submission of their comment.
I mean, the reason why I'm trying not to bulldoze people on this one, but the reason why I am trying to find an alternative suggestion here is I'm wary of bracketing this one to bring to GSA for an investigation of what they find possible and then coming back. We're already bracketing some language in the preamble, which we haven't gotten to yet. And so I do want to make sure that the committee is able to, you know, produce a recommendation on this, or take it out. But I am wary about sort of bracketing it all and then taking it to GSA and then bringing it back to the committee, which is why I'm being a little bit fussy on this.
Sure, and I think as long as it's stated a little more generally, and you know, we discuss the need to notify the public at whatever the appropriate point in time is, that I'm more comfortable with that than something that prescribes that it has to be in an automated response to email. So, you know, I think the language as sort of currently written is fine. I'm not sure exactly what the right point of time is. You all probably have an opinion on that, but I think this looks okay to me as written.
Thanks, Steph. I appreciate it. Let's Levon, on your recommended language that we have in here, let's return to that now. This is to notify the public of agencies' policies with respect to protected personal information and CCI at the point of comment submission or after submission of a comment. So let's focus on that. Is that the proposal, or in light of the conversation, is there a way that we can trim that back?
Well, I think the concern is that we don't want to get in this situation because the different agencies have different policies of putting it on the GSA to sort of capture those. So I think it should be notifying the public that that agencies may have policies, like something more general of just with the goal being that any sort of communication from GSA to the commenter is that, hey, there might be some policies that protect certain information, but not getting into what those policies actually are.
I mean, if the notification is no more than the agency might have policies, you should go look into that. I have to say it's not much of a recommendation. I mean, at that point, we might want to just consider taking the recommendation out altogether, because I'm not sure what it adds. But I don't know how we can have anything more concrete than that without running into the problem that Steph's identified in terms of tailoring links or disclosures per agency. I think we're going to have to choose. Well, what do others think about this? I mean, is there a point at which even referring to GSA opens up more doors than we want to, raise? It opens more problems than it purports to solve. I mean, again, we added this in order to recognize that GSA has a role in this, but if we can't mention GSA without raising fundamental questions, we might want to just remove it altogether. Anybody? Go ahead.
Peter. Yeah, I don't mind actually the shorter. I guess from hearing this discussion, if the idea is at least that GSA would flag for people that yes, their agencies may have particular policies. It's not like the most earth-shattering recommendation, but I'm not sure we'd have to get rid of it just because it's that short. I mean, do people feel it has value if we're just saying to GSA, flag this for folks?
Emily?
It also just, it continues to seem very strange to me that if we are asking agencies to provide this information at various stages of the process and to provide that kind of last chance opportunity to use the policies that the agency has to sort of, keep back from publication something that was maybe inadvertently included or whatever, then not acknowledging that GSA has a really significant role in those systems just seems silly. And like I hear the concern that we don't want it to be overly prescriptive or impossible, but I just think it's really weird that we would not acknowledge GSA or involve them in any way in a recommendation that's designed to improve this kind of structure. And the other thing is that even if it's not possible right now, I mean, things change and platforms are modified. And if we think it's a good idea and that this is the kind of functionality that GSA should include, I don't see anything wrong with including some kind of general principle that encourages that development, even if it's not immediately implementable, right? So what, in 5 years, if GSA changes their system, maybe this is one of the things that they could consider as they're working towards those improvements.
This is Peter. I think that's I agree with that. I think that's spot on.
Hi, this is Susan from OMB. I just have a quick thought for your consideration. I don't really think GSA should be responsible for these policies. However, the recommendation could indicate agencies should post these policies on one of their public websites, and then GSA could link to it from regulations.gov so folks could know where to look for it and could point to it. Just a thought.
But and you mean a sort of a customized agency by agency approach, and GSA would link to the specific agency?
Right. So I mean, GSA here is just a conduit. They're helping facilitate comment retrieval and providing comments to the agencies and getting them, putting them in dockets. And it would just be strange for them to be responsible for an agency's policy. But I think referring to them through a link could be doable. So there could be another page saying for specific agencies policies on X, this link to GSA, this link to DHS, yada, yada, yada.
I mean, that approach would certainly be the simplest and most straightforward, because it seems to me all it would require would be taking the language we began the day with, and instead of saying include the notifications, just say include or refer to the notifications, or even just refer to the notifications.
I think the language that we had at the beginning of the day, though, did include discussion of an automated email. And that's where, like, it's very easy for GSA to put up a web page that has all of this information. And it's easy for GSA to maybe link that web page in the email. So that seems very feasible, but having a customized email that refers individually to each agency's own web page is where it would be more difficult. But if that's what folks really want, I don't disagree. I thought Emily's points were great, and we just want to consider the feasibility language if you do want to be very specific.
Susan, were you referring to just a web page, or were you referring to the emails that are sent in response to?
So if there's an automatic email, we have received your comment for general policies on how agencies manage your comments, see this page, and it would provide a list of links to various agencies. So that way you wouldn't need the customization, which may not be possible, but then would also supply more information if folks wanted to find it.
Okay. Let's before this gets too far at hand, let's start with Susan's recommendation, since it is sort of the simplest. As I understand it, would be to take the language that we started with and say, instead of include the notifications, include or refer to the notifications described in paragraph 2 within any automated emails that regulation.gov sends. Let's start with that proposal, and we'll have a vote on that. All in favor of including refer to in recommendation 4, to include or refer to the notifications, please vote yes by raising your hand or voting yes in the chat function. Todd, you might need to keep a track of this one. Keep your hands up, please. All right. Todd, let us know when we can stop. And then we'll take the no's.
So I'm counting 7 yeses on the chat.
And what about hands up on the screen?
9, 10, 11, 12. So I'm counting with you, Adam, 13 in total.
Okay. All right. Hands down. Let's go with no's now, and then we'll proceed to further discussion of alternatives if the no's outweigh it. No. Okay. All right. Again, I'm sorry to if I'm being a little heavy-handed in this, but I want to make sure that we bring this one to a conclusion and move on as soon as we can. All right. So why don't we adopt that and we'll proceed. Thanks, everybody. Okay. Recommendation 5 now, we get into, oh, by the way, in the chat before that, Jenny Jones asked a question. Is CCI actually defined above confidential commercial information? We don't define it. It is referred to in the second paragraph of the preamble. Confidential commercial information is referred to along with protected personal information, then grouped together as protected material. The preamble, which we'll get to, is going to have a discussion of the legal analysis. And so there might be a more specific reference, but as of right now, it's just referred to in general terms.
Yeah, the only thing because when we were doing the edits, when Todd was doing the edits, he was saying CCI. So I just wanted to make sure if we're using CCI that it's actually defined above. Like the CCI means confidential corporate information. Same with protected personal information.
Sorry about that. I misunderstood.
No, that's okay. Your answer was better than mine, but.
Okay, so going on to the next, you see we've redlined out the old recommendation 4. So the first recommendation is now, well, you can see it on the clean version. Does anybody have any comments or discussion on recommendation 5? Okay, how about recommendation 6? Recommendation 7. None. Okay. This is the moment when I worry that my sound has gone out or something. Okay, new recommendation 8 under allowing submitters to notify the agency of material that they inadvertently submitted. Recommendation 9 under allowing third parties to notify the agency after the agency publishes the comment of material that they want removed, is referring to materials that others had posted. Any comments? Okay. Recommendation 10 under screening comments for personal information and protecting such material from disclosure. Recommendation 11. Sure, go ahead. Andrew? Oh, sorry, I thought somebody was trying to speak.
No, I'm having technical issues. So sorry about that. This was kind of moving quickly. One thing to consider, and I know ACUS tends to be very complete and consider all aspects of something. But I was going to say an idea, and whether it's a footnote or not, just something to consider, is somewhere in here when we're saying assurance of protection, something that there are agencies that have those already, and that they should be, to the extent they, ACUS is not trying to recommend anything that's inconsistent with existing regulations. And I don't think it does. And then when it talks about in the recommendations where it talks about removing things, just there are sometimes qualifications on agency preservation of records and things like that. And I know that's just, again, in terms of completeness, whether it's, again, a footnote just to be said, like, of course, nothing would take away from our responsibilities, with respect to federal records and things like that in terms of removing things from the docket.
Yeah. I mean, throughout the recommendations, we've been taking care to focus on just the public rulemaking docket, right? Not suggesting that things be deleted altogether from that.
Right. And that's fair. I just, again, it's just in terms of if you want to address that and be, sometimes these things are fair, pretty soup to nuts. And so this would be just another thing, a loose end. If we wanted to tie that up, we could.
Well, how about this? Since we're already doing redoing the legal analysis, Todd, can we just make a note that we'll see about including just a sentence to that effect in legal analysis, that we're referring here only to public dockets and not offering any recommendations regarding the destruction of public records or something like that? I mean,
yeah, they're actually we've a revised preamble which appears above when we get to it. There's a footnote that I added that might address that concern, might not. I think it probably does. So when we get to that, I think it's footnote 1 or 2, and we could see if Andy, or maybe it makes sense to go to it now, or wait for the preamble, whatever you think is better.
Let's bracket that for the preamble, unless Andrew, you feel really strongly about including it in the recommendation itself.
No, I think we can visit at the preamble.
Okay. We were on recommendation 11, I believe. Recommendation 12, any discussion? Recommendation 13. Okay. All right. Well,
Todd,
thanks everybody. Go ahead, Dick.
I had that suggestion that's in the margin on 13.
Yeah. Changing it from information on which they have relied to information that they may have considered. And Dick, do you want to just, for folks who aren't familiar, you want to describe where that's coming from?
Yeah, I mean, the starting point is I don't think we want to suggest that an agency can rely on non-public information to defend a rule. I'm not aware of any case that is so held, and the one case that comes close to addressing that arises in a different context, but it's the opinion in Sierra Club versus Costco, in which the DC Circuit says, well, it's often the case that agencies consider things, in that case, opinions that they've gotten from the president and the majority leader of the Senate and cabinet members, but not relied on them. And there's nothing wrong with an agency considering something that they don't rely on. But I don't think we want to suggest that an agency can rely on information that it has not included in the public record in the process of defending its rule, unless somebody's aware of some case that I'm not, that so holds.
Okay, so the amendment then, as the comment suggests, would be to change on which they've relied to information that they have considered in formulating rules. Any further discussion on this? Would anybody object to that amendment? Okay. All right, Todd, can we go ahead and make that change then? Let me bring it up on my screen so I can see it myself. When they have information that they have received from the public in connection with the rulemaking and may have considered in formulating, I'd say, the rule, because it's referring to a rulemaking. I probably should have clarified that before asking objections. Dick, does this accomplishes what you had in mind?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Any objections to that? All right.
Adam, I do have one question.
Go ahead, Todd.
If someone has an objection, they should go first. But before we move to the preamble, I just had three quick things that I wanted to clarify just to make sure I understood what the committee voted on.
Sure.
So the first one is with Susan's recommendation. I know that we had, or Susan suggested change to recommend paragraph 4. I know we had a lot of language up on the screen. I just want to confirm that the language that we're looking at right now is in fact the language that was voted on. Could you, or if someone says, you know, that isn't quite what I voted on, I just want to make sure this is exactly what they voted on.
Yeah, I sure hope I didn't breeze through that too quickly. What we voted on, at least what I meant for us to vote on, was just including adding the terms or refer to after include.
So I think this is correct, because this was the original language: work with agencies that participate in regulations.gov to include or refer to. So that is correct.
Again, I sure hope I didn't give short shrift or to the description of that.
No, I don't think you did. I just wanted to be sure for my own peace of mind.
Sure. Okay. And Todd, what's the next one?
The next one was someone, I forgot who it was, but there was someone who had suggested some type of clarification on what confidential commercial information was, and that it would be helpful to define the term. And I just wasn't sure if that suggestion was to define the term in the numbered paragraphs or in the preamble.
Right. I think as Jenny and I wound up discussing, if I understood her correctly, she raised that at the point when we had inserted in language that ended up not getting adopted the term CCI, and she was saying, well, if we add this into recommendation 4, do we need to go back in earlier and define CCI? And
Okay.
and Jenny, I think by not including it in recommendation 4, it mooted the problem, right?
Exactly.
And then
Thanks.
the third, okay, thank you. And then the third thing was Andrew Simons's first point regarding acknowledging the fact that some agencies already define what kinds of materials should be protected, or sorry, they have policies with respect to whether or not they're going to afford confidential treatment to business information. And I think he had suggested adding in a footnote or some kind of explainer. I just wasn't sure if that concern was addressed.
Well, I don't think it was addressed in substance in the recommendations. I think I alluded to the fact that we could return to it when we get to the preamble. Right,
Okay.
Andrew?
Yeah, I think that's right.
Okay.
I did have one sort of question. You know, we talked a little bit about the personal information and whether we call it protected personal information or whatever. And I recognize that's it's a little bit difficult to untangle, but it seems like that would be we should think about a conforming edit throughout, right? So, and
Todd,
so maybe that's a better thing to address in the preamble throughout what we mean. Or I'm just realizing as we go through this, like even in this last one, you know, when agencies withhold from public disclosure personal or confidential commercial information, there's just a consistency issue throughout. Not sure the best way to.
Go back. As a style matter, we go back and make the conforming edits.
Yeah. Okay.
Todd, can you bring your screen back to recommendation 1? Because I think, yes, so we did include protected personal information per Andrew's suggestion there in recommendation 1, acknowledging that it gets a little circular when we say about protecting protected information.
Right.
Yes, I think that's right then, Todd, that we need to make a conforming edit throughout.
Correct.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Now let's turn to the preamble itself. If Todd, you can bring back up to the screen. The preamble is now much shorter, in part because there is this bracketed discussion of the legal analysis, which will circulate when it's completed. I'm not sure how to begin on this. I guess rather than go paragraph by paragraph, does anybody have any comments that they want to begin with? Any particular language they want to comment on? Just open it up. I see. I got to open up my screen. Somebody had a hand up, and now I can't find. Oh, Robert, go ahead.
Yes, it's a really minor point. It was just raised a few minutes ago about this line 43, providing the public with the information upon which agencies relied. Again, just to be consistent, may have considered rather than relied.
Thank you very much for flagging that. That's right.
That was it.
So apropos Dick's comment on the last recommendation, while still providing the public with the information upon, well, wait a second. So while still providing the public with information, Dick, I mean, apropos your comment, do we need to change this one also to considered?
I hadn't thought of that before. I'm just reading it now.
I mean, because yeah, obviously we do need to disclose, agencies do need to disclose the information upon which they relied. I'm not sure your recommendation changes this point though.
Yeah, I think it's less clear, but I don't think that we lose anything by making that change. That may have considered. There's certainly there's likely to be in some rulemakings material that an agency considers but doesn't rely on that falls within these protected categories. But I think this change is a desirable change.
Well, and again, Dick, the recommendation at the end that you had the amendment on, I mean, it was referring to times when agencies withhold from public disclosure information that they may have considered, right? That was the point where we were saying, yeah.
Yes, because I think it's at least questionable whether an agency can rely on information they have withheld from the public.
Right. So that's why. So Robert, I want to come back to your initial comment. Does that change the way you're looking at this language then?
Yeah, I'm no longer sure.
Because recommendation 13 is about information that has been withheld from the public. Here we're talking about information that is given to the public.
Fair enough. I think then I withdraw my suggestion.
I saw Andrew in the chat has a question on footnote 4. Andrew?
Yeah, thanks. So I appreciate this being responsive to the conversation we had about anonymous comments. I guess I wonder, and they are somewhat different, the issues with anonymous and pseudonymous. The question I had sort of like the inclusion of, the use. So two things. I'm not always sure agencies do this with the purpose of protecting personal information. I think it may serve that purpose, sort of ancillary. I think I don't know that that's the reason agencies allow for that. But putting that aside, it says it raises a number of legal and policy questions. I guess I was wondering what the thinking there was in terms of what actually the legal issue is with allowing commoners to provide anonymous comments. It's a practice agencies have done for a long time, is my understanding. And I didn't think there was any legal bar or legal. So the inclusion of that sort of suggests maybe that the practice of that is, I don't know, has legal issues. So there may be sort of ancillary issues that come out of that. So I was just curious about the drafters, what the reason for including that characterization and whether that's necessary.
Now, if I remember correctly, this footnote is what was inserted after we deleted language that referred to agencies giving less legal weight, less weight to comments that were submitted anonymously. The idea was to sort of make that point sort of much less specific while still alluding to the fact that anonymous and pseudonymous comments might raise collateral considerations. In terms of how it was specifically drafted, though, I think this is, Todd, if I'm wrong, this is sort of the first cut at that, and so there's no reason why we can't change the language.
We can, and I think just getting rid of legal and policy would probably take care of the concern, and I don't think we would lose anything if we did that, but that's obviously up to the committee.
Well, let me propose then 2 amendments responsive to this concern. One, and both coming from Andrew's comment. One would be to delete as a way of protecting personal material, right? So as to not specify why it is that agencies necessarily allow anonymous or pseudonymous comments. And then the point you just made, Todd, about deleting legal and policy, right? Right, Todd?
That is correct. That was my suggestion.
Okay. Does anybody have any comments on rephrasing it this way? And Andrew, is this responsive to your concerns?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. All right.
Adam,
any objections? Oh, go ahead. Somebody was trying to interject.
Sorry, Adam, not objecting, just one question. It seems like if we get rid of as a way of protecting personal material, the footnote sort of comes out of thin air. It then leads to the question of why are we talking about anonymous and pseudonymous? Like it's just sort of like a random footnote at that point, but.
You could say maybe, although submission of anonymous pseudonymous comments may serve to protect personal material, that's beyond the scope of this recommendation,
Wait, could you repeat that?
Something like, although the submission of anonymous and pseudonymous comments may serve to protect personal or something along those lines, may have the effect or may serve to protect it. Though that's beyond the scope of this recommendation.
It is funny that
Those raise issues and are beyond the scope of this recommendation.
it's funny. I suppose people who are reading this recommendation clean won't have any idea where this one is coming from. Christopher, what do you think? Do we need to include at all a reference to the issue of anonymous or pseudonymous comments once we've taken out that language about the weight that agencies give to anonymous and pseudonymous comments?
So as I recall, the idea is to bracket off the other the other project going on by the administrative conference. And one way may be just to refer to that project specifically. Is to make it less come out. There is, and you could even just say there is another proceeding or project addressing this issue, and that may make it feel less out of thin air and explain more clearly why we're bracketing off the way we are.
Reeve, can we refer to the?
Sure. Yeah, I don't see any issue with doing that, though. I guess I'd wonder sort of how exactly you're proposing that be done, Christopher. Would this be in addition to the language that's already there? Like this issue is being addressed separately as part of the study of mass fraudulent and computer-generated comments, or would you solely refer to that separate project and then just leave it at that? I guess I sort of would wonder what the formulation would be.
So if I were to try to make this as simple as possible, I would probably say apologize for the roughness, issues regarding the submission of anonymous and pseudonymous comments are being considered in whatever the number is, I don't remember, in project or I don't know the right way to refer to it right now before recommendation in a current ACUS project and are beyond the scope of this recommendation.
The reason why we're discussing this, right, is that it is what's sort of currently in there, that some agencies do use anonymous and pseudonymous comments as a way of protecting personal information, right? It touches on the concerns of this recommendation, and at the same time, this recommendation isn't touching on that issue because there's a whole separate proceeding for it.
And I guess the only thing I'd edit, Todd, is instead of a parallel ACUS project, I don't know.
I'd maybe say something like ongoing ACUS project. Parallel to me sort of implies at the same time. Bad minor suggestion.
And so do we move the language between after CCI and the bracketed language? So it could go CCI. So you have the intro, although, sorry, it's very small on my screen, so I'm trying to read it. May serve to protect PPI and CCI, then comma, then issues regarding submission of anonymous are being considered ongoing beyond the scope of this recommendation. We could just make it a shorter footnote.
Todd's typing that in. Reeve, can you just remind me, what's the status of that project? Does it have a number and a title? Is it announced?
Yeah, so good question. So it does not yet have a number because that's only once the recommendation is adopted. I think probably the cleanest way of referring to it is an ongoing project titled Mass Computer Generated and Fraudulent Comments. That's its technical title.
Okay. So let's give Todd a moment to type this in, and then we'll clean it up and get the committee's approval or disapproval of it. Okay. Todd, is there a way for you to switch your view over to clean just so people can see exactly what the new language looks like? Okay. Although submission of anonymous and pseudonymous comments may serve to protect PPI and CCI, issues regarding the submission of anonymous and pseudonymous comments are being considered in an ongoing ACUS project and are beyond the scope of this recommendation. Does anybody have any objections to this language? I see whose hand is up. That's Jenny?
Sure. Yeah, I just had that same comment before. It's fine saying PPI and CCI, but as long as what PPI and CCI, should we spell those out or?
Well, yeah, Todd,
we call them together protected information in an earlier language. So that might just.
Okay, then maybe say protect.
They serve to protect protected information. Again, we have that bad locution, but.
Yeah, it's fine. Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Jenny. Okay, does anybody else have further comments on this revised language? Any objections to this revision? Okay. All right, thanks everybody. Thanks, Andrew. Other comments in general on the preamble?
This is Margie O'Haron. Should I speak to my comment? It looks like you've made an effort to address it. Yeah, but okay. So just a few things, and looking at this mostly from a Privacy Act perspective. I'm referring to the older draft. So I don't know that these line numbers are gonna work. But in lines 26 to 28, I was recommending that we have some reference to the Privacy Act because agencies are prevented from disclosing certain information, and so to comply with the Privacy Act's terms, they might not be able to disclose all information that's received in a regulatory comment. So I don't know whether your sort of legal analysis here is, excuse me, is designed in part to address that concern, and then my other concern, which was just at the bottom of page 3, lines 51 to 60. Were that the 3 types of information that are listed in that paragraph don't track or don't include all of the kinds of information that would be covered under the Privacy Act. The privacy, so that, so I don't know. So is your inserted legal analysis section there intended to address some of those concerns?
Yeah, Margie. So the language on the red line with the edits at 51 to 60, where we had sort of the 3 categories: unique identification numbers, names, email, physical addresses, confidential commercial information. So that's all been deleted out, so that those offering those examples doesn't imply the exclusion of other categories that we didn't cover. We've deleted that out. Now, the earlier versions of this recommendation had a much longer discussion of things like the Privacy Act. And that's one of the things we've been grappling with throughout this, and why we're going back to the drawing board on a shorter discussion. In the red line with the comments, it's lines 37 to 43, where it says a revised legal analysis section will appear here. As it suggests there, we are going to try to, as it says, cover very briefly the fact of the Privacy Act and the other statutes that Christopher's report details in much more detail, because as we sort of said from the beginning in these discussions, these statutes impose duties on agencies that the agencies have to comply with. There's a comment, this recommendation is going to cover, in effect, both the mandatory non-disclosure duties, mandatory disclosure duties, and sort of that zone of discretion that agencies have. And so whereas previous versions of the recommendation had much more detail, the revised version, when we fill in this placeholder, will have a much briefer discussion of that. So I think it is going to include, I mean, I'm not asking you to buy a pig in a poke, and we'll circulate the language. But we're trying to allude to these statutes without including too much language on the specifics, because what we don't want is for the plenary meeting to get bogged down into debates over the substance of those statutes.
That makes a lot of sense. I think so long as we have a reference that agencies are bound by those, and that reference is right up at the front in the preamble, that makes me much more comfortable. I mean, getting into the nuances of what's covered and not covered is a quagmire that, right, one could never escape. So gotcha. That makes sense.
That was our first meeting, the quagmire.
Yeah, I missed that one. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. Your comment is very well taken, and we're taking it seriously as we try to draft out that language. Okay,
so you'll send out that revised language for us to look at.
Exactly, and again, if we'll send out the revised language, and if we can resolve it by email, wonderful. And if we need to have a sort of a fourth brief meeting, we'll do that. But we're not gonna. We're going to make sure that that's really vetted seriously.
Terrific, thanks.
Any other comments on the revised preamble?
Adam, are you going paragraph by paragraph or just the whole thing?
Well, I wasn't going to go paragraph by paragraph. I wanted people just to sort of zero in on what's of most interest to them. But since folks, I seem to have exhausted people's comments, should we go through paragraph by paragraph?
I don't have a preference on that. But I do want to make sure that Margie's first concern regarding the what's included within the three buckets that we mentioned. So that was deleted from the recommendation, but it does still appear in the preamble. So I'm not sure that we fully address that concern, and it might be worthwhile focusing on the paragraph that I have highlighted here.
That's a fair point. I'm sorry. When Margie said that, I was focused on the old recommendation 1 and not this. You're right.
Okay. So it's still there.
Yeah. You're right. I'm sorry about that. So, well, Margie, so then let's return to your concern. I mean, we are going to have the inserted language about the Privacy Act, the Trade Secrets Act, reference to the Portland Cement Doctrine of requiring disclosure, and so on, in a section that follows immediately after this paragraph. So this paragraph is not the final word on this, but it definitely does tee up a general statement of some things that are often withheld.
I mean, I recognize that the paragraph begins with, although not intended as an exhaustive list, but I still find that reading through it, by setting out 3 categories, it sort of suggests that even though this is an exhaustive, these are the only 3 categories that there are, which is not correct, right? So could we say an example of one category or an example of a second category, something that really hits home that idea that we're just providing, some specific context, which is meaningful, but without seemingly excluding sort of vast categories of other information that would similarly be covered.
Well, and by the way, are there any other categories that again, a lot of this hinges on what the following paragraph is going to read like, but are there any other sort of categories that you'd want us to flag specifically up front in this paragraph?
I'd have to think about that. I mean, I guess in general, my concern was just that the definition of a record is much broader than any of these categories would suggest. So, the Privacy Act definition of record.
Yeah. Christopher, do you have any, not to put you on the spot, but do you have any thoughts on this as we try to offer this general description here?
So if our idea is to avoid substantive decisions as much as possible, part of me says that the strategy of referring to the Privacy Act and the Trade Secrets Act in general without going into details of what it requires might make sense, which there's an argument to not getting into this issue at all. The flip side is giving agencies some flavor or guidance of it, of an idea of what we're talking about. It can seem a bit like obscure without some guidance, and so I find myself conflicted. My instinct is to say less and leave the substantive issues about what needs to be protected and what's not to another document and to other processes, because this is just about another recommendation or internal agency work, because it's just about a procedure. The only downside to that is if it doesn't actually specify what it is, it may be unnecessarily obscure as to what the scope, what the recommendation is really talking about. And often the example of concrete examples can help motivate and understand and clarify the underlying recommendation. So I see Marky's point, and I'm sort of
yeah, I think that's a good point. Yeah. Would it be possible just to get rid of the categories? I mean, I think that's what's kind of tripping me up. And if we just provide, I agree with you that, to make this meaningful, to have some specific examples is useful. Otherwise, it all just kind of, right, it's just sort of jargon and terminology, and people don't always grasp what the practical import of that is. But instead of having these three categories, which to me do suggest a more comprehensive coverage, could we just provide some examples without providing categories?
So it would be, instead of one category of protected materials, it would say protected materials sometimes involve unique identification
numbers, bank account numbers,
yeah.
it just lists, email addresses, physical addresses, medical information, because those, I mean, that's really the point, right, is to get to those specifics.
Yeah, and then the second, so later on where it says another category, we're actually talking about, and maybe what's confusing here is we're talking about something different. We're talking about the process by which this issue is arising at all, right? Sometimes this information is submitted unwittingly by the submitter himself. Sometimes the information is submitted by a third party, and it pertains to the privacy of another person, right? Okay. Let me propose. Let's get this up here on the screen. Okay. Okay. So here's what I see we're trying.
Sorry, any of these types of information could be disclosed by a third, about a third party, right? So that the categories, to me, the categories, I guess they're two separate things, right? One is the categories of how they're submitted, and one is the actual content of the submission or the information that's included. And maybe we're trying to do two things in here that is creating a little heartburn for me.
Yeah, this is all coming into clearer view. I
mean, could we say these are the? Sorry, I'm just trying to think of how to get some language in there. But could we say these are the types of information, however submitted, whether by the commenter or about a third? I mean, I'm not using the right language, but like about a third party, kind of get those process things up front, and then provide the examples of the types of information that would be covered.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry if I look like a deer in headlights right now. I'm just trying to figure out how we can rearrange this paragraph to say what we meant it to say and accomplish what we meant it to accomplish.
Right. Fair enough. It's a lot of there. Yeah.
Okay. Todd, don't type anything yet, but here's what I'm thinking. I think first, identifying the problem that this information arrives. No, that's not right. I'll tell you what. This is going to be bound up with what follows in the Privacy Act the legal discussion. Would it be okay, Reeve, Todd, Matt, Sean, if we bring this back with us and clear this up with the legal analysis and submit an entirely new paragraph to the committee?
I certainly have no objection to that. I think that makes a lot of sense. That might be the best way to integrate
Yeah,
those two portions.
I don't want to have everybody to have to kind of endure drafting on the floor. All right, Margie, I appreciate your flagging this for us, and because you've spotted a real problem here. Why don't we, Christopher and I and Todd, and take this back to the drawing board and fix it up with the paragraph that follows.
Okay, appreciate that.
Does
I'm
anybody
happy
else have
to.
any guidance on this for us to take back to the drawing board with us? Jenny, were you going to say something? Okay.
No, sorry.
All right. Any other comments on the preamble excluding these two paragraphs, the one that Margie identified and the placeholder for the legal discussion? Okay. Well, why don't we do this then? If the recommendations have been voted on and the preamble is waiting for this hole to be filled, Reeve, is there anything left for us to cover in this meeting?
I don't believe so. No, I think we can probably end of it early, unless if there are other outstanding issues with the preamble that people would like to discuss.
Adam, I'm sorry, I do have a couple of points that I just wanted to follow up with. The first was with Andrew Simons's question about the records retention and the footnote that might address it. We said that we would return to that when we were discussing the preamble, and I just wanted to be sure that this footnote addresses that concern. So the footnote I was referring to was footnote 1.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw that and appreciate you're making that change.
Okay. Does that address the concern you raised regarding the not losing sight of agencies' federal records retention, or should we add a sentence to that footnote saying something to that effect?
So that is a slight. Thanks for reminding me about that. That is a slightly different issue, which I thought we're packing into the sort of legal discussion that, to the extent that agencies are, taking things out, removing things from the docket or whatever, it doesn't. This recommendation isn't saying anything about their federal records obligations or things that sort of to keep the materials.
Yeah,
Right.
I think we need to include something.
Slightly different issue, and I don't. Again, it's just in terms of completeness, is how that was being offered.
Yeah, Todd, let's make a note to include something to that effect in the legal discussion. So I agree. I think it's important to have that in there.
Okay, that was all I had.
Okay. Anybody else? All right. This has obviously been a challenge from the start in trying to figure out how to say everything that needs to be said without saying too much. And I appreciate everybody's sort of patience and as we work through these issues. And I appreciate everybody's patience as we continue to work through them with the two paragraphs we're going to be inserting in the preamble. Matt, do you have any closing thoughts before we bring the meeting to a close?
I do not, as long as everybody, do you think everybody's clear on the process going forward?
Yeah, so let's just repeat this. So after this meeting, Christopher and I are going to reconvene with the ACUS team on drafting up those two paragraphs, on fixing the one that Margie has flagged and filling in that legal analysis, which is going to include the brief discussion of the statutory framework, the mandatory duties for disclosure, the mandatory duties for non-disclosure, and that zone of discretion in between, and taking care to flag along the lines that Andrew spotted, that obviously there's much deeper questions of record retention and so on that aren't implicated by this recommendation, that we're only talking about the public docket. So once we've drafted up that language in the next couple of days, we will circulate that around to the committee for your review and comment. And then at that point, see if we can resolve it by a vote via email, or whether it requires or would benefit from one last brief meeting to button up that language and vote on the preamble.
And the vote would presumably be on the entire recommendation. Is that right, Reeve or Adam?
Correct.
Okay. Jenny?
Yeah, for those of us that are filling in for someone who's a voting member, can the people who attended in place of somebody today also be included on that email? So for instance, I'm filling in for Jim Anderson at the FDIC. So Jim Anderson and myself would be included on the email.
Yes, I think that makes the most sense. Todd, could you just, anybody who attended today's meeting on behalf of somebody else, just add them to the distribution
Thank you.
Circulate?
Perfect. Yeah, because Jim wasn't he wasn't in the meeting, so he wouldn't understand what he's voting on. But that's perfect. Thank you so much.
All right, Christopher, do you have any closing thoughts before we go? No? All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much for your patience as we work through all of this. And we're going to look forward to bringing back the final language after this to kick around, finish up, and then vote on. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Adam.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.